cool, though. All right. Mara, what are you doing back there?
Honestly, want me to be honest with you?
You were looking at your phone.
Okay, but there's...
Okay, now you're on camera. Administration's going to see this and say you should have removed her phone from the classroom. All right, so we talked a little bit about the TVA yesterday, correct? Now, a lot of benefits from these dams. But, what's wrong? To help with this, the government is going to take two old World War I munitions plants that were built during World War I, and they're going to convert these into fertilizer factories. So there's going to be cheap fertilizer for farmers in the area. You have irrigation because you have these reservoirs now that farmers can use that water for crops. So between those two things, you're going to improve the farming. Okay? You have the cheap hydroelectric power. Okay? Now, some people didn't like all the government intervention here because if you were, say, a privately owned company that made fertilizer for farmers, and then the government comes in, takes over these two large factories and starts producing massive amounts of fertilizer and selling it really cheap, how do you, as a private business, compete with the federal government? Not really. It's hard to, okay? And so if you're an electric company that you provide power through coal, and the government comes in and builds all these dams, and now people can get cheap electricity, they're not buying it from you, how do you compete with that? Well, again, you don't. So some people thought that, called Roosevelt a dictator, pushing out small businesses and so forth. Okay, now, everybody can have their own opinion on this. We are in a depression. This is an economically depressed area during a depression, and some would say that this was a good move on the part of the government. Okay, it's still around today. The TVA manages these dams and so forth. As I was mentioning yesterday, people of the tree-hugging variety don't like these, especially in the Northwest, a part of the United States, because there's a particular kind of fish that can be found in the Northwest, which is, of course, what?
Trout.
Well, there are trout.
Salmon.
Salmon! I love salmon too. And fresh salmon, the salmon have to swim which way? Upstream to do what?
To mate.
Correct. Spawn is the correct term, right? To spawn. Okay. Okay. All right. This is so everybody can get on camera. Hi, Alec. We're doing this for you and you alone. Okay. So salmon have to swim upstream. If there's a dam in the way, the salmon can't get up the dam. So bring technology in. There's companies now making what are called salmon cannon, where the salmon will swim into the salmon cannon, and it will be sucked up through this tube and sent up, flying out over the dam into the water. Yes, it's called the salmon cannon. And I think you should see this.
I really want to.
Yes, everybody wants to see the salmon cannon. Salmon cannon. Meet the salmon cannon.
What we do
do is we create a localized pressure differential with air in a closed environment. That closed environment is a flexible tube that has almost zero friction coefficient inside. So by localized pressure differential, what I mean there is in front of the fish as compared to the back of the fish. So if it's a lower pressure in front of the fish by atmospheric pressure is going to be pushed towards that lower pressure differential. And so happens with the live fish, they also think that they're in about 30 inches of water. That's the pressure that they feel in there. And so they actually start to swim right in the tube. And so you can see that in the video. It's like a slip and slide going uphill.
The cost of this system was about $150,000. But this system is portable, and so it can be used basically anywhere. So it's on a trailer. Everything, the tube gets rolled up onto a reel. All the pieces that are attached to the weird trap box are put onto the trailer, and then it can be towed and hauled anywhere. This allows us to remove fish at a faster pace and be able to get through fish in the trap box at a faster pace than we could with the old system. And so we can remove more hatchery fish to allow more fish to move into the trap box. So now we can remove more hatchery fish. The idea of this weir is to control hatchery fish above the weir to keep the...
So they have to feed
Let me show you this
by
one.
hand?
Well, these ones they'll swim in.
Fish cannons shoot salmon upstream. Chinook salmon swimming upstream to mate have been having some problems. Humans have been constructing dams that block their migration routes, making it harder and harder to get upstream and breed. One company has come up with a new device to help salmon on their journey, and it involves a cannon. The salmon cannon is a pneumatic tube that helps fish pass man-made water obstructions like dams and shoots them upriver. Hydroelectric dams can cause barriers for salmon migration as the fish need to swim upstream to spawn. A new invention, a salmon cannon, can shoot fish upstream over the obstacles. The vacuum sucks the salmon in, and then the elevated pressure behind the fish pushes it forward at about 15 to 22 miles per hour, or 5 to 10 meters per second. The pressure per square inch used to launch the fish also causes little or no scale loss. The idea came from transporting livestock and perishable products like fruit. The Washington state-based company Whoosh came up with this idea from their apple transporting tubes, which can shoot apples into the air without causing damage.
Whoosh. There's several other salmon cannon videos you can find on YouTube. Okay. Now, as you all recall, the tragedy of the Great Depression, according to Hoover, was homelessness. Okay? And so, help for housing here. Okay? So, I'm going to get a couple different things. One is we're going to try and keep people in the houses they're already in so that they are not foreclosed upon. Okay? And what they're going to create is the Homeowners Loan Corporation to issue $20 billion in bonds. This is basically financing to refinance mortgages. Now, generally, guys, the rule is if you own a mortgage and interest rates drop, interest rates drop. So you're paying 6% interest, annual percentage rate. If they drop to 4%, it makes sense to refinance your mortgage. That means basically sell your mortgage to another lender and pay them 4% instead of paying 6% that you're paying now. Now there's some closing costs and some fees that go along with refinancing, but it will save you on your monthly payment. Okay? So sometimes it's really, I think it's about 1.5 points difference you should refinance, because it's going to cost you like $1,200 to do or something like that to refinance. So if it's 1.5 percentage, it makes sense to do it. Now a lot of people did that in the last decade because interest rates kept falling. Okay. Now the National Housing Act creates the Federal Housing Administration. This is still around today. And what this does, guys, is it insures loans. Remember the FDIC and how it insures your money in the bank? Well, guess what? Now banks and lending institutions have the backing of the federal government. So if Wade doesn't pay his mortgage and it gets foreclosed on, the bank is insured. It's insured. Now, they don't do this, this today is not, they don't do this today, but the Federal Housing Administration is still around. Okay, this was a temporary fix for to protect the banks from major foreclosures with people losing their homes. Okay, just insurance. Okay. Now, do any of you guys remember studying? Did your teacher last year talk about this type of housing? This is like an aerial view of an apartment complex. Dumbbell housing. Does this ring a bell at all? What about tenement housing?
It sounds like it was a term that was passed over.
Okay. When I was in New York City this summer, we went to this museum called the Tenement Museum, and it was pretty cool. Kids probably didn't think so much, but I did. My wife thought it was cool. These houses that were built, the ones with the front steps, in New York, just rows of houses. These were called tenement houses. In many places, they built these types of apartments. So this is like a courtyard in here. Okay, this is an aerial view from above. They call them dumbbells. This area, they'd run like clotheslines across. People could dry their clothes. And then these courtyards. See, these are subsidized by the government, and they became slums. Okay, and so the government's going to tear them down and build new ones. All right. But the Tenement Museum is really kind of a neat thing because they kept one of these apartments, or a couple of them, exactly the way they were when they bought this building back in the 1960s. And it stayed the same. And the floors are rotting out. The walls, you can kind of see the different layers of wallpaper that each tenant that lived in there put on throughout decades and decades, okay? And they tell you the story of this neighborhood, that when the neighborhood was built, it was an Irish neighborhood. And then the Italians moved in, and the Irish left, and it became an Italian neighborhood. And then the African Americans moved in, and the Italians moved out. And then it became an African American neighborhood. And then the Puerto Ricans came in and pushed the African American. And just like, and they kind of tell the story. And they kept track of every family that lived in that apartment. And they can trace it back to that apartment. It's pretty cool. And some of the people's ancestors whose family lived in there, say, 80 years ago, have been back to visit and so forth. And they kind of tell their story. So it's kind of a neat museum called the Tenement Museum. All right. Now, as far as housing goes, guys, these dumbbell apartments became the slums. And so the government decided to tear them down and build new projects. Now, that word projects, does that mean anything to any of you guys? The projects? Huh? Say that again? No? You said it. She said it. It's like the hood. How many of you guys have ever seen the movie Blindside, Michael Oher?
Yes.
Where his where he goes back to look for his mother, right? And he's hanging out with all those dudes and they're drinking beer and stuff, right? Guys, when I grew up in Florida, we called them the quarters, okay? But it was a bunch of little red brick houses, a bunch of them, all in a big area, okay? This one here in the background of this slide is Queensbridge in Queens, New York. And it had, in these buildings, 3,142 apartments. Now, if you put 4 people in an apartment, you've got 12,000 people that all share what in common? Yeah, they're all poor. Okay, this is government subsidized housing. It's called Section 8 housing. I don't know if you've heard of that. Okay? These projects that were built in the 40s, okay, 30s and 40s, are now just within the last 20 years being dismantled. This housing project, Queensbridge, was demolished. It was condemned in the late 90s and then demolished. Okay, Cabrini Green in Chicago, one of the most notorious public housing projects in the country. LA, at Watts, they had thousands and thousands of apartments for poor people. Okay, and these become places of crime, violence, gangs, drugs. Okay, when you put that many poor people together, you're creating a very poor environment, not figuratively and literally. It's not a good place to raise children. There's an old movie called Hardball. Keanu Reeves plays this guy that gets punished by the law, and he, community service. He has to coach this little baseball team. Have you seen that movie? He coaches it's all these little black kids in Chicago, and he's got to coach this baseball team. And so he gets to know these young guys. I mean, they're like 9, 10, 11 years old. And one of them lives in Cabrini Green and gets shot. And it's really sad. Well, this was a reality. I mean, what we saw on film. And so some cities, I think it was really Atlanta was the first one to really figure this out. Because we didn't figure it out here. We tore these down and we built new ones. Now what local government cities are doing for Section 8 housing is different. They're trying to spread it out. And if you look around Wichita, you can find little brick houses like this in kind of poor areas of town. But they're not all in one area of town, if you know what I mean. Okay, which is good. That's smart. Because you want to disperse that poverty. You don't want it all concentrated in one area. So what governments are now doing is take Aspen Apartments over here by the softball and the practice football fields. You know what I'm talking about, Aspen. What the government will do is say there's 500 apartments in that unit. They'll buy 50 or 100 of them and designate them as Section 8 housing. Then people that are poor, that qualify, can apply to get subsidized by the government to help pay their rent. Now, for families that apply for this, you can actually get subsidized housing in houses, not just apartments. Okay? Now, somebody asked the other hour, said, so, Mr. Yara, how do you feel about, is this what the government should do? Should we have subsidized housing? Yeah, I think personally I feel that, it's a safety net issue. So if you have families, if somebody loses their job or goes on disability and they can't afford to pay their rent, do you want the family to go into the streets or into a homeless shelter or something like that? Well, no, I don't think we want that. I mean, I think that there's a safety net so that you try and help get people back on their feet and not become homeless. We don't really want that to happen. You guys know, and this sounds cruel, but a lot of people that are homeless choose to be homeless. Okay? There is help out there for people. Okay? Union Rescue Mission. Any guys familiar with Union Rescue Mission? It's over by my house. It's pretty close to my house, northeast. Just if you go straight north of Wichita State over on Hillside. It's for homeless people. Men. It's for homeless men. Okay? And my wife and I, we try and help there. We give money to help with that. But it's a place where when it's cold, people can go. They have somewhere to go. But some of those guys don't want to get their life back in order and, This is why sometimes people tell you not to give money to people that are on the streets asking for money. Okay? And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, if I got a $5 bill or a couple bucks, or some loose change, and there's a guy at the intersection saying I'm homeless, okay, is he really? Or is this guy just, trying to get some money for, some beer or cigarettes? You guys ever talk about this in religion class?
Mm-hmm.
What do they teach you guys on that?
I feel like it's
Food?
I'm told to give them food more than give them money.
Yeah,
You can offer
that's a
them.
good idea.
I used to have like toothbrushes and toothpaste little packaged things with an
Yeah.
like you just like
Just like helping them in a way that you can understand, or like what the end of it is, like feeding them, making them hungry,
Yeah.
versus giving them just food.
Yeah. So I will tell you guys, I have a buddy that lives at 21st and past Mays going out towards 119th. There's a neighborhood south of 21st there. And he owns his own home. He's a teacher. His wife's a teacher. And they have a mortgage. And they're paying on it. This is the largest investment they have. Well, somebody built like 8 houses across the street from them. All cookie cutter, same look, exact same houses. Okay? And they got them designated as Section 8 housing. So people could apply for government to help pay for them to live in these houses. The problem that Tom, my buddy, had was that, what happens to his property value when you put these houses across the street? Because sometimes renters don't take care of the property like homeowners do. And another thing he noticed is that the police were called a lot more often to his neighborhood than previously. Now, that was about 7 or 8 years ago. I think those houses have now been sold, like to people that want to buy them. But it could hurt his property value if that was the case. So dispersing the poor like this, I think, is a wise thing. But some people don't like it. If you're moving poor into areas that are more affluent, some people will like, is this going to bring crime to my neighborhood? So I mean, those are things that society we have to grapple with. And if you ever become a member of your homeowners association, like I did, these are issues that you can talk about with other people in your neighborhood, okay, or on the city council or on the county commission. These are issues that they deal with, zoning issues and Section 8 housing, so forth. Okay, so hopefully we've learned some things from history on this, and we've made some better decisions. Okay, and that was all created by the Wagner-Steagall Act and U.S. Housing Authority, the projects. The AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, is going to create the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. And of course, this is here to help farmers. And what do they want to do? They want to raise the income of farmers to pre-World War I levels. Is that asking too much? Now, for farmers, guys, the solution here for the New Dealers is that there's too much surplus of food. Guys, when there's a surplus of food, what happens to the price? It goes down. Now, so if you have a bumper crop of wheat or corn or what have you, the price goes down. You have a lot to sell, but you can't get anything for it. Or if you have a bad harvest and there's not much wheat to sell, what happens to the price? It goes up, but you don't have very much to sell, so you can't make money. It's what you would refer to as a catch-22. Yes, Parker? Catch-22? So, the government proposes through the AAA to reduce surpluses of farm products on things like wheat, corn, cotton, hogs, tobacco, and milk. So, you're a farmer, and the government comes to you knocking on your door. Hey, Farmer Jed, we don't want you to plant your wheat crop this year. And Jed's like, well, how do you suppose I'm going to make a living? And the government says, don't worry, we'll send you a check. Now, where's the government going to get this money for a check to pay a farmer not to plant his crop? They're going to tax somebody else, manufacturers. So Henry Ford gets a knock on the door. Henry, we're going to put a new tax because you're a manufacturer and you manufacture cars, so you're going to have a new tax. And Ford's like, okay, so you know what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to pass that cost on to the consumer and make cars more expensive. You know I'm going to do that, right? And they say, yeah, we know, but we need money to pay farmers, not to grow their crops. So here's your tax. Now, remember when we studied the Constitution? Where in the Constitution can you say, okay, I'm going to tax this guy, and I'm going to take the money from this guy, and I'm going to give it to this other guy for not doing something? This will be struck down by the Supreme Court, this tax, as unconstitutional. Okay. Now, what about the cotton crop that's already been planted? Well, they knock on Farmer Mike's cotton farm, and they say, Mike, you need to plow up your cotton. What? I just planted it. It's starting to grow. No, we need you to plow that up. And what about all the pigs that have already been born? Farmer Elizabeth, you see all those pigs you got back there? We're going to need you to slaughter those pigs before they grow up and become rotund. I did have a student whose grandparents had a hog farm in Kansas, and the AAA came knocking and said, we need you to kill these pigs. If you don't kill the pigs, we'll kill them for you. But these pigs are going to die. Here's a check for your pigs. How many pigs? 6 million baby pigs will be slaughtered.
Okay.
Oh, you want to see some slaughtering pigs?
No, I'm fine. I'm just curious as to why.
Have you ever seen the movie
Official Wilbur?
Babe? That'll do, pig? That'll do. If you haven't seen Babe, I feel sorry. You didn't have a fulfilled childhood. You never saw Babe. Hey, what are you guys talking about? Babe. The first one's really good.
Okay.
Babe Does the City. It's not very good.
I think we should watch it. In honor of...
If we have some time, I'll show you some Babe. Now, you can't let these pigs grow up because, it's rotund. You use the whole pig. Right? Pig intestine. What's that used for? Sausage lining, casing, right? What about the feet of the pigs? Pickled pig's feet? You ever heard of that? What about the pig snout? What about pig ears? What do they use those for? For dog treats. Yeah. You ever heard of pork rinds?
Yeah.
That's the skin, right?
That's gross.
Huh? Now, have you ever heard the term? Well, when you use all these different meats, bacon, and ham, and pork chops, and tenderloin, whatever's left over, they just kind of mix it all up and make hot dogs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you ever heard the phrase, living high on the hog? You ever heard that? Okay, you guys need to read more. If you're living high on the hog, people, the meat at the top of the hog is more valuable than the meat at the bottom of the hog. It's cheaper at the bottom of the hog. Okay? Like its guts. That's your hot dog. It's cheap. Okay? But you get your tenderloin, your quality chops up top. Okay? You're living high on the hog. Secretary of Agriculture Henry A. Wallace said, this is the only way farmers can earn enough to live. Guess what's going to happen to farm income? Well, listen, it's going up. Farm income, 240%. Well, of course. I mean, if you're having trouble selling crops or even growing crops, Dust Bowl, and drought, right, and grasshoppers, and the government comes in and says, don't plant, here's a check. What's going to happen to your farm income? It's going up. Now, farmers, as this says right here, now this doesn't include all farmers, but most farmers in this country today do receive some government subsidy for farming. Every 10 years, guys, this country passes what's called a farm bill. And it is hundreds of billions of dollars over 10 years for the farm bill. Now, a lot of what's in that is food stamps. That goes in the farm bill. Food stamps are dealt with by the Department of Agriculture. I don't know if you guys knew that. So like what we eat at lunch, the control that the federal government has over what we eat here, that is done by not Michelle Obama, okay? It's done by the Department of Agriculture, okay? So you can call those people if you're unhappy getting, I'm not going to say anything else. I don't want to get in trouble. Yeah, it's on video. I got to be careful what I say. All right, so I think that's where we finished the other class. Goodbye.